Well, greetings, everyone. And thanks again for joining us once more for the online version of our teaching time right here at Eagle Brook Church in the North Woods of Wisconsin. And as you know, we're in the middle of a series called Who Are You Becoming? Are you becoming more like Jesus or something else? And today's teaching focuses on three different areas, but under the same theme: difficult people, difficult circumstances, and just difficult moments even when or even with the people that we love and that we care for. All right, so let me ask first. Anyone here ever have to deal with a difficult person? With difficult people? You know that one person that you find really annoying, that always disagrees with you, always wants to argue with you, that constantly offends you, and when they speak, you already know it's going to get on your nerves, right? I'm sure most of us have somebody in mind with that category. All right, now how about difficult circumstances? Circumstances that someone specifically has put you through that was harmful, hurtful, damaging. All right, so anyone here have a difficult circumstance either you have dealt with or that you are currently dealing with? Again, many of us can relate to that as well. And then thirdly, how about those, strange, weird, awkward, tense, and we'll call these difficult moments with people that you love? Your friends, your spouse, your kids, your parents, a church member. But something is said or done, you have an unresolved disagreement, or you feel provoked somehow, and you get irritated, hurt, and offended. Anyone ever been there before? So, difficult people, difficult circumstances, and just difficult moments with just about anyone. So how are we, as followers of Jesus, as people who are supposed to be becoming more like Jesus, how are we supposed to handle it? Well, that is what we're discussing today. See, the question is not, how do we keep from being provoked and irritated, but rather, how do we respond when we are? And Paul lays that out for us in Colossians chapter 3, beginning in verse 13. Paul writes this: "Bear with each other and forgive each other. If someone does wrong to you, forgive that person because the Lord forgave you. Even more than all of this, clothe yourself in love. Love is what holds you all together in perfect unity." See, the truth is, folks, every relationship in your life will eventually be tested and strained. You will get hurt and offended even by the people that you are closest to and love dearly. Let alone those difficult people in your life, right? So how should a follower of Jesus respond? Well, let's start unpacking all this with our first point. So number one, bear with, do not bail on each other. That's the beginning of verse 13. And this phrase, bear with, means to make allowances for one another's imperfections or faults. And I will add either perceived or real, and we'll go into that a little more in a minute. It literally means to put up with, to hold back, to endure. It's a word that is actually used for God throughout the Scriptures. That as He looks at and deals with us, It speaks to his holding back judgment in order to extend then and show mercy. Now, there is no perceived fault or imperfection when it comes to humanity and God, right? It is real and it is ugly because we are broken. We are a mess. So God bears with and does not bail on you, on me, or on humanity. His desire is to turn our brokenness into wholeness. And out of our wholeness, then, to reconciliation and being restored. Now, granted, bearing with us does not guarantee that we're going to respond to be made whole or reconciled. I mean, people are stubborn that way, right? I mean, have you ever noticed that? But it does not change what God does or how God operates. And Paul is laying that out for how God's people, those who are followers of Jesus, are supposed to live. We are to be a people who bear with, who do not bail on others. With the desire then for them to be made whole and reconciled to God and to you and to be restored. And this deep desire to see them stop acting in hurtful and irritating and immature ways. But here's the problem. One, they may not stop. And two, it's just a lot easier to bail. I mean, we are a culture that bails out so easily on so many things. Once things get tough, once you get annoyed, or once you reach your breaking point. We even bail on people based upon perceived faults or imperfections. Not necessarily real ones, not a matter of right or wrong, but things like, our little quirks, the differences in our personalities or styles. What you find important, they do not, and then vice versa. I mean, those things alone can be enough sometimes to irritate you or offend you, right? And we perceive those things sometimes as a fault or an imperfection when in reality they are not. But we still have to learn how to bear with those things, to make allowances for those things. Now, another area of perceived fault or imperfection is when you have a huge disagreement over something, which is simply based upon your view or your opinion. And if you feel staunchly that your view is right, then you will feel that the lack of the other person to see it your way is a fault or an imperfection, which would, of course, go away if they would agree with you. So again, it's not a real fault, not a real imperfection, just a perceived one. But again, one that you have to deal with and have to bear with and make allowances for. And at the end of the day, not to make those things big deals. But either way, perceived faults based upon opinion, or very real faults or imperfections based upon our brokenness, we all too easily bail on our marriages, our kids, our jobs, our friendships, our connection to a church family. Only to find that the next job or marriage or friendship or the next church is just as messed up as the last one. So may we heed Paul's words here. May you bear with and do not bail on each other, especially during these times that we're all facing. And as we do, beginning as part of a church family, may it then have repercussions into our home lives, our work lives, our school lives, basically everywhere. But may it not just stop there. And that takes us to our second point. So number 2. Cancel the debts of the past. You see, it's not enough to simply endure some kind of an annoyance or refuse to retaliate or play someone's childish games of trying to provoke you into an argument, or to simply bear with and stick together after a very big disagreement. Because all that is simply a defensive posture. It is a good one. It is absolutely necessary, which is why Paul includes it here, but it is only defensive and it is passive. The next 2 areas that Paul brings to light are proactive, beginning with forgiveness. See, there are times when there are very real wounds and real hurts that go much deeper than what we just discussed in number 1. And going further than simply bearing with means that we actually have to forgive each other. That's the next statement that Paul makes in verse 13. He then goes on for greater clarity. He says, if someone does wrong to you, forgive that person because the Lord forgave you. So real, legitimate, not perceived wrong. That person is to be forgiven. But then Paul gives us a reason, an example, really. We do this because the Lord has forgiven us. In other words, we are actually to compare whatever our issue is to the size of the issue that God forgave. Our sin nature, the consequences of our sinful condition, sin and death, but also our own current sinful, less than God's best choices. So God forgave us, Jesus forgave you, and forgave me all kinds of wrongs. Therefore, what Paul is saying then, that we are to do the same. Now, what you may not know is that the word forgive comes from the Greek word charis, which is the word for grace. Forgiveness implies that someone has an emotional debt that they owe you. Something was taken from you. Something was done to you, said about you. You are made to feel a certain way by them. I mean, it could be something huge. Or maybe it was something relatively small. Only you know what that is and what that issue could be and what it is in your life. And forgiveness then is choosing grace. It is literally canceling the emotional debt that the other person has owed to you. Now, to many, your first reaction is, no, someone has to pay. If I forgive, then they get off scot-free. But that is so not true. Folks, your forgiving them does not exonerate them before God. They are still accountable to God. The difference is that we give the right to judge and to bring judgment to God, the only one capable of doing it righteously. You forgive, God will judge. That's how it works. Well, then you say, well, that's not fair. Because you feel, again, someone has to pay. And you would be exactly right. It's not fair. That's why it's called grace. But the reality is this: someone has already paid. And that person was Jesus on the cross. And just as Jesus has released you, forgiven you, paid the price for you and me, then we are to release others and forgive them. Because if we do not choose to forgive, what often happens is this: all the things listed back in verses 5 through 9 that we covered a few weeks back, anger, rage, malice, slander, begin to rear their ugly head, causing more damage and more chaos. And it leads us down a path that no longer looks like Jesus. So let me ask, what if in our culture, in our state, in our nation, our world at large, what if people chose grace and forgiveness instead of anger and violence and retaliation? We could actually break the cycle of hatred and begin to see peace and reconciliation and restoration. But it has to start with the people of God, the followers of Jesus. We have to model and teach and live something different. And that takes us to our third and final point, okay? So number 3. Make your life about what is most important: love. Loving God, loving others. It always comes back to that, doesn't it? The purpose of a church is to help people love God and love others. It does not get any more complicated than that. And folks, that's the grid that I want to be measured by. Paul said in verse 14, even more than all of this, clothe yourself in love. Love is what holds you all together in perfect unity. Meaning that without love, we fall apart. The best attempt of bearing with or forgiving will just get too difficult and we're going to give up. Love is God's motivation for bearing with and forgiving us. Because He is just love incarnate. However, we are not. We are not love incarnate. Hence why Paul has to say here, what he says here is that we need to put on or clothe yourself in love. Because it's a choice. A choice to live by what is most important. Because without love, nothing else matters. The Apostle Peter says something very similar in his own letter. He writes this: above all, most importantly, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Now, just hearing that by itself is powerful. But let me put it into some greater context, if I may. See, Paul and Peter actually had many run-ins over the years. And many tried to play off Peter as a rival to Paul. Just reread the opening chapters of 1 Corinthians for a refresher on all that. So just to retrace their history. It was Peter who stood up for Paul at the very beginning, who even gave Paul an audience after Paul went from imprisoning and killing Christians to becoming one himself. I mean, nobody trusted Paul until Peter gave Paul credibility. But at some point, Peter had slipped back into a law-following form of righteousness, and he made life very difficult on the Gentiles. And a lot of Gentile churches began to follow Peter's teaching, and it hurt Paul in the process. And they had to work out some serious issues, confrontations, hurt feelings, maybe even jealousy. But eventually they worked it out because they were on the same team. They both truly loved Jesus, and the key was they both allowed Jesus to keep changing them. However, there was a lot of damage along the way that did not have to happen. And a lot of people were affected by it. Paul probably said some things that he regretted. And I'm sure Peter regretted falling back into the religious thinking instead of standing firm on just the gospel. And then all the hurt that following that law-based system caused people. So after all of that, I want us to reread Peter's words now, as I'm sure he even has himself in mind as he writes this. Look at it again. Above all, most importantly, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Folks, Peter knew that firsthand. Maybe you do too. Maybe you need to be the one to cover someone else in your love, in God's love. Which brings us back then to Paul's words here. Love is the only thing that holds us together. And then he adds to this other comment, holds us together in unity. And I want to highlight the definition of this particular word, unity, just to wrap this up. Unity in this sense means fully developed or mature or whole. Meaning this, that love is the full expression of our maturity. See, relationships of any kind, friendships, marriages, work relationships, relationships within a church, that do not work through their conflicts or their offenses or their hurts, they never grow up. They never grow. They remain stunted in their maturity. And it continues to play out in how they keep treating people both now and into the future. And how they react to things constantly. But those who begin to respond with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, to those who begin to respond with patience and bearing with others and forgiveness, then that leads to a mature, more fully developed relationship. A relationship that more fully reflects the image of Jesus. Your friendships mature, your marriage matures, your ability to parent matures, your connections and expectations of a church mature. Even how you respond to all the noise we're dealing with the world right now, even how you respond to all that begins to mature. We are called to grow and mature, and love is the greatest example of that maturity. That is what it looks like to become more like Jesus. So, as we begin to bring this to a close, let's just be honest. Let's be honest that yes, there are those truly difficult people that we have to engage with. We don't get the option of not engaging with them on a regular basis. However, we all have a tendency to be annoying or offensive to each other. Even the best of us. We are all going to irritate each other from time to time. Any of us are capable of a bad day. And innocent people often get caught in the crossfire. Which means that we need to learn better ways to deal with it, or we will continue to repeat the same patterns we've always done. Bailing out, dividing, or fighting. And Paul right here has given us an alternative. One that helps us become more like Jesus. One that shows grace and bears with and offers forgiveness. And makes the main thing, love. So what would happen if all of us began to truly live this way? Let's find out. See you next week.